lived next to one child whose whole head was wrapped in bandages, even his face was covered. I remembered that his name was Wilbur, a 12-year-old boy who never left the house. Sometimes he would look out of his upstairs bedroom window at all the children who were playing outside, while Wilbur sat and watched. I remembered that there were strong metal bars on these windows, so there was no way he could get out of his bedroom windows. Sometimes we talked to each other, texting on pieces of paper because Wilbur couldn't hear me because the window was closed. Wilbur only does this when his parents aren't around because they're weird. According to Wilbur, his mother and father were among those parents who were madly passionate about science and chemistry. They stayed in their basement and worked all day and night long, except when they had to give Wilbur some food every day. So they don't treat him like an animal, it's just that his parents were very busy. They told Wilbur that he should not go outside and make contact with anyone until his face was better. He told me that he accidentally slipped on one of the starting chemicals and fell face down, ruining his appearance. And his parents were afraid that the other kids in the neighborhood would laugh at him. I remember one day a couple of older kids were throwing rocks and pebbles at his windows, laughing and pointing at Wilbur as he looked down at them. He told me they do it a few times, but he's used to it. But for me, he's a great guy, and he remains that way to this day. I've never been to his house, but he showed me some cool stuff that he collected, like comic books. He had a lot of them, from Marvel to DC and other non-superhero comics. He was a big fan of superheroes. He even said he felt like a superhero. An ordinary person who was exposed to dangerous chemicals and then became a powerful superhero. One day he wrote something on a piece of paper and hung it on the window, pretending to be a superhero. I had a collection of action figures and video games that amazed Wilbur. He told me that he had never played video games in his life, which was pretty sad. He also told me that his nanny took them from him before he learned to play and burned them in front of his eyes. Wilbur had an evil babysitter named Miss Fitzgerald, a tall, mean lady who never liked children at all. He told me it started before his face turned bad. In fact, she was every kid's nightmare, of all the things I've heard her do. Miss Fitzgerald has babied many children before, and believe me, it wasn't pretty. Wilbur told me that she spent 7 hours of hell with the last child she babysat, a 4-year-old girl. Wilbur said that Miss Fitzgerald starved her and surrounded her bed with several bear traps. And the worst thing that happened was that her parents didn't know about her act. She lied to them just to get the money. Everything I've heard says that she's a dirty, cruel woman with no soul. Usually. And now she had to babysit this poor guy. Wilbur was old enough to make his own decisions, except for some, but his parents obviously hired an evil witch. Her parents had to go to Texas for a science conference, so Wilbur was left alone with her. I wrote about it once to show him, but then I saw Miss Fitzgerald forcefully pulling him away from the window, and so the rest of my day went by, and I still didn't talk to him. The next day, when I looked out the window to look at Wilbur, I saw someone lying on his bed. Looking at the man's head wrapped up, I knock on the window with my fist, trying to get Wilbur's attention. He slowly sat up on the bed, wiping the tears from his eyes. He seemed to be crying, which gave me an idea. I had a worried expression on my face when I saw the bruises all over his arms and legs turning dark purple. He went over to write something down on a piece of paper. Then, when Wilbur finished writing, he went to the window and pressed the note against the glass. What he wrote horrified me. The whole situation was still burning in the back of my mind. I knew I would never forget it. He wrote, "Help me." The worst part was that his handwriting was scribbled on paper and was almost illegible. Wilbur continued to bang on the window with his other hand, and suddenly I saw someone else running into his bedroom next to him. It was her. You know who. There was something in both of her big chubby hands. There was a lemon in one hand and a pair of scissors in the other. What Miss Fitzgerald did scared me even more. Miss Fitzgerald ran up to Wilbur, grabbed his head, holding it still. I saw him screaming in pain and fear, so I knew I had to do something. At the same time, I couldn't stop watching. She cut the bandages with scissors, took them off his head and threw them aside. What I saw almost made me sick. I felt sick. I was completely shocked to see Wilbur's real, disfigured face. His whole head was completely covered with bandages, and what was under them, I knew for what purpose. I saw his face, almost melted, with a dark red layer underneath. I could only imagine that his face looked like melted cheese on a cheeseburger. Wilbur's entire face, even one of his eyeballs, was slightly burned. The chemicals have ruined it badly. Miss Fitzgerald cut a lemon in half with scissors, pinning Wilbur to the bed. Then she threw the scissors aside, next to the bandages, and held his head motionless with one hand. With her other hand, she squeezed a slice of lemon onto Wilbur's head, into his eyes, onto his flushed face. The painful expression on his face, his loud, muffled screams, his face stinging from the acid of lemon juice. She squeezed the juice from another lemon onto his face again, causing Wilbur severe pain. I decided to knock on the window with my fist, which was a bad idea. Miss Fitzgerald looked out of the bedroom window, right at me. I jumped back, she noticed me. She ran back out of the bedroom, pushing Wilbur down the stairs as he screamed in pain and agony. I knew what she was going to do, so I ran out of my bedroom and down the stairs. The good thing about this situation was that my parents didn't know about Wilbur and the fact that they had been at work for a while. I locked the front door, hoping Miss Fitzgerald wouldn't break into my house. I looked around for my home phone, but at that moment there was a loud bang in my ears. I looked back at the door, noticing her red, sweaty face and curly blonde hair. I could tell by the look in her eyes that there was going to be some kind of trouble. She kept banging on the door, almost shouting at the top of her voice. When I looked around for the phone, I finally noticed it next to the sofa on the coffee table. I ran to him, dialing 911, when I heard Ms. Fitzgerald's threatening screams outside. After waiting for a few rings, I finally hear the operator's voice, the usual greeting from the 911 operator. I began to explain the whole situation from beginning to end, as quickly and clearly as possible. They told me to wait patiently as the police would arrive at my house soon. It took the police a few minutes to arrive at my house. Not only did they arrive, but my parents also came home from work early. Obviously, the police called them, explained my situation, and they decided to return home. My parents were extremely worried and scared. They asked me more questions about it than the police. I had to explain everything, from the fact that I was friends with Wilbur, to how his parents left him with an abusive babysitter, and what she was trying to do. About an hour later, a policeman came up to me. He wanted to tell me something about the terrible atrocities that took place in the neighborhood. The truth about the babysitter, the parents, and Wilbur was truly shocking. Based on the evidence found, Wilbur's parents were not his real parents at all. They adopted Wilbur from an orphanage outside the city just to experiment on him. That's the reason they moved to Texas to hide. The nanny, Miss Fitzgerald, was also involved in the experiment. In fact, Wilbur was not the first child adopted by scientists. They conducted illegal experiments on these orphans, and their goal was to find out how much pain a child could endure before death, based on the cause of death and the age of the child. 38 children between the ages of 2 and 13 were missing, and Wilbur was one of them. Surveillance cameras were installed outside and inside the house. Right now, they have arrested Ms. Fitzgerald for child abuse and the deaths of many children, and are conducting an investigation to find 2 scientists. All this, and I was friends with a man who would have been killed if I hadn't called the police. Obviously, Wilbur was also trying to lie about almost everything he told me. He was trying to protect himself. He was sent to a trusted new family, to a married couple who lived outside the city. I have never seen him since, until today. 20 years later, I went into a bar to have a drink alone when a man approached me. "Do you remember me?" He said that this familiar man was smiling at me. I smiled back, realizing how long it had been since I'd last seen Wilbur. In fact, now, without bandages, he looks like a nice, healthy man. He was a brown-haired man with sky-blue eyes. He looked almost like a complete stranger.